Welcome to the Health Tech Edge, where we talk with people using technology to make healthcare work better. I'm Mike Moore from Productive Edge. Today's guest is Makoto Kern, founder of IIIMPACT. He leads product design and strategy for enterprise software teams across complex industries. He also hosts the Make an Impact podcast. Our topic for today is how strong user experience and product strategy help healthcare teams use AI responsibly and avoid common failure points. Makoto, welcome to the show.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for being here. It's great to have you. And what I love about your background in product design and strategy, I feel is missing from a lot of the projects that we see out in the industry where people just kind of dive in head first and maybe kind of think about things, but don't necessarily think about it like a product. And having worked in the software industry for the last 30 years, I've worked with some great product leaders who really bring that mindset into everything that they do. I think internal IT teams, and as they approach different initiatives, they may not have the product mindset. So let's maybe use that as a way to dive into the conversation. AI is obviously, you can't spell anything out with the letters AI right now, right? Everything is AI, every initiative and every project. What are you seeing inside of the organizations that you work with? And when they're moving fast, what happens along the way as they're trying to get going on these initiatives? Maybe some of the things that are happening that are not intended, right, but kind of the negative pieces of it, so we can then focus on solutions.
Definitely. And it's interesting. I'm seeing kind of parallels to the dot-com boom and bust, where a lot of companies are just diving right into being very feature-centric, because when you're very tech-led or tech-driven, the tendency is to just say, hey, if we build this feature, everybody's going to come. And that's how they think streamlining into that is actually the wrong thing to do. I always equate it to companies that are like, let's just build a house, 2 floors, 3 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and then we'll have the users move in, and then they can tell us what they want. And that obviously is an expensive mistake, or it can be very expensive, and it's very risky. So we're seeing a lot of companies, especially now with AI, the ability to move much faster. It's obviously a force multiplier, and your competition is going to be on your heels. As soon as you do something really cool looking or whatever, a good idea, they're going to copy it very quickly. So when companies are just integrating AI willy-nilly without actually asking their users and their customers, is this solving a pain point? It becomes problematic, because then they launch it, we see metrics, and after a first prompt or two, they don't use it anymore. And so there's a lot of investments and time that's going into it. And if you don't do it right, it's just like any other feature. If you don't do your upfront strategy research, it's not just going to be used. And so those are some of the things that we're seeing right now. Is the same as the dot-com boom and bust.
Yeah, and I think a lot of this is, especially when we look at healthcare organizations, like any organization, there's a lot of people involved in the buying process. There's a lot of people involved in the design or the vendor selection or agency selection process. And maybe or maybe not, the end users who will actually ultimately define the success or failure of this initiative aren't in the process, or maybe are in the process. But I think that's one of those things that I'm sure when you look at it through a user experience lens, you've got to think about who's ultimately going to use this software and how these features will affect their work and the benefit to them, right?
Oh, for sure. That is a common mistake, where they usually solve for the buyer and not the user. Maybe the executives use the beautiful dashboards, but somebody who's using it maybe really late at night, they're tired, or they're moving around, they're on a tablet or a mobile device, and they're using it in a different way. This is something where they don't have that empathy, and they make the mistake of showing it off to the higher level people. Are like, yeah, this looks great, it looks beautiful, but we're not actually asking the users and asking who use it day in and day out to say, hey, is this something, a high fatigue environment like healthcare? It's something really important to ask them. Don't make a mistake. Is this something that helps at this point of need? You have to be very contextual when you're solving, even enterprise. I mean, B2C does it well, but B2B and enterprise software, they tend to make those common mistakes.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the high fatigue environment, and also mentioning the form factor. I think that's a really important call out, because, for example, as I sit here speaking to you and recording this podcast, I'm using this very wonderful Samsung 49-inch widescreen curved monitor, which is essentially 3 screens worth that I have in one beautiful interface. The nurse on the floor who's seeing multiple patients in a shift might be using a PC at one moment, might be using a tablet the next moment, and might be using a mobile device the next. And so how these experiences translate across different device form factors and what they see as the day-to-day user of it, I think is got to be an important consideration.
Yeah, that omni-channel experience, I mean, we understand that from a consumer point of view. If you're shopping around, you're at the store, you look at something, you're on your mobile device, you go home, you finish buying it. If that omni-channel experience isn't seamless, you basically create friction points of the buying process. But when it comes to enterprise, yeah, especially in healthcare, if you're jumping around, you're seeing a patient, you're driving home, something pops up. If things aren't easy to use, you're going to miss something very important. And when it comes to healthcare, it could be something that is life or death or life threatening. And that type of testing and that type of research is basically a lot of times is omitted because they feel like, hey, we know what we know, we make assumptions, let's just build it because we need to launch it faster, and that generally leads to a lot of these problems.
Yeah, and I've seen this firsthand. I've told the story on the podcast not long
Mhm.
ago about a loved one who was in the hospital, and this particular piece I haven't mentioned before, but the loved one was getting a medication from the nurse who came to the bedside and had a handheld device and was scanning the barcode on the medication on the loved one's wrist on their badge, right? So like you can imagine kind of where the data elements come together, right, from a back
Mhm.
end point of view. But the sequence of those steps, and there was multiple scanning of all those items because it wasn't registering properly. Now we know
Oh.
there's kind of from a charting standpoint, from a billing standpoint, from an accountability standpoint, who did what to whom at what time, and all those
Mhm.
kind of details are incredibly important. In that case, it wasn't a critical, need this timestamp, this moment, administer the medication within seconds or else, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it was a little problematic. And I think great that they're using that kind of technology, but obviously these kind of high stakes environments are really key to make sure that the flow happens seamlessly and that the error rate is very, very low, if not as close to zero as possible.
Yeah, just when we go through this type of process, we try to make sure we have a process that we do an alignment with executives, and that's from a business goals and kind of problem standpoint, that's always important. But getting them to understand how it affects their users and what their users' pain points in their journey is, it's amazing to see how much is assumed, and having those things aligned to your business goals is part of this process that it allows for the executives to have that empathetic mindset to say, hey, everybody has an opinion when it comes to design, but when it comes to like, why are we doing it this way? There's a lot of things that are happening on the screen. Why don't we just have less clicks? Tends to be like a default answer for a lot of people who don't know design. And it's like, if you're sitting there and you have a form that has 50 form fields and you think, okay, it's just one page. It's very easy. And you're filling it out, but then you're a nurse and you're jumping around and you're trying to do these things and you have to form resets or something, or you make a human error. And this is something that is very problematic. So getting that mindset into the executive team when you're coming up with these features and designs is so important. And so it's great to have everybody have an opinion, but to have an opinion that is defended by data and research it makes your app so much more powerful.
Yeah, I guess was last company before coming here to Productive Edge.
Mhm.
We had the software Gong that we used to record all of the conversations with people's permission, right? Of course.
Mhm.
But the data insights from those conversations from the sales team, I was leading partnerships, particularly with Microsoft as one of our initiatives. And I could go through and just do a keyword search from Microsoft or other related terms and see how often it was coming up in our conversations. Because my goal was to make it come up more often in the conversations with the
Yeah.
programs and campaigns that I was running. And
Mhm.
so similarly, and we're talking a lot about kind of provider examples in healthcare, but the payer side is just as important, if not more so in many ways, as people interact with their plan and they're calling
Mhm.
in on the phone and asking questions, and how fulfilling is that experience, and for the customer service rep or member services team that's talking to them, how efficiently can they go through that conversation? How are they collecting the information they need to give the member the responses, accurate answers to questions, those kind of things as we go? Software like Gong and similar solutions can give you that data that you're advocating for, right? To make sure it's not how we think it is, or we interview users, which is obviously a valid part of product design and kind of getting their contributions. But it's
Mhm.
almost like if I ask, and you look like you're a pretty fit guy, we've never met in person, but if you ask people like, how well did you eat today? People
Mhm.
tend to be the best versions of themselves when they get interviewed. versus if you actually had a calorie tracker or something that looked at every single thing that went into them, right? Or
Mhm.
every single phone conversation, and I have data that actually tells me that story
Yeah,
in a very objective way. So I think the data inputs are really a key piece to kind of designing that experience and not just diving in, as you say. Like, let's think about those form fills. Do we really need to ask for all of these fields to be filled in, or could we pre-populate that because we already have that information in a system? It's just
yeah,
a matter of kind of wiring those experiences together, and that opportunity, I think, to take that big leap forward in the technology application for whatever the use case or scenario is a great opportunity.
definitely. One of the well, yeah, one of our clients that we've been designing an experience that they are a fitness company and they have a fitness physical product, and one of the things is to introduce users to how to set it up, how to read the information correctly without overwhelming them. And it's an interesting thing because I see similarities where the executive team and the people who have been involved, they have these biases that will tell you, hey, we want to show all these things that this fitness device does. We want to show it off, show these great dashboards. We want to show like you can control all these different systems and you can personalize it. And to do that initially is so overwhelming to any user. I don't care if you have fitness devices before, maybe you're a little bit more of a power user, but to introduce somebody who's just starting off with any kind of system, you don't want to overload them. And so it's always a tendency to kind of push and pull and reset the executive team to say, hey, you have a lot of things are intuitive for you because you've been involved with this. But me coming in new, to me, it's very overwhelming. And I mean, again, this is just me sitting at my nice desk with the big screen monitor and seeing something. It looks beautiful, but on a device and you got very limited real estate space. And if you're working out or if you're doing something, you're like, oh my God, this is too much. And so, there's always that balance that us as designers have to constantly like check the team to say, hey, I know it's great. You got great features, but let's really think about the user's kind of cognitive load at that time.
Right. And the example that you're giving too, I can imagine in the world of fitness devices and having worn a couple of these things, and now I'm
Mhm,
just down to the Apple Watch, which is obviously a very sophisticated device in and of itself. But there are the people who want more sophisticated
mhm,
devices and they want the data. But the things that we design for typically in healthcare, it's such a broad spectrum of users, right? You've got obviously an aging population that's still very phone based, very face to face based. They're not as technical in terms of device usage, though. My
mhm.
mother, who's 75, she does her telehealth appointments and uses her iPad to do it and that kind of thing, which is great that she's able to get into the My Chart app and do some of those kind of things. But obviously, you've got a broad spectrum of people, and I think when we're designing these experiences and considering not everyone is the same. We've got a very diverse population of patients or members, depending on kind of provider or plan side of how we're looking at it. And they need to be considered. And I think an important factor too is the trust in these solutions. So how do people look at the products that are put in front of them, both internal users as well as external users? What advice do you give to organizations when they're thinking about how they build trust with the users around these new AI-based solutions?
Yeah, this is interesting where I think if AI tries to be either too smart and gets into where I feel you're creating these systems that it feels like it's very overconfident. Like this is the answer, this is the solution, and you're seeing that with a lot of AI. Like, is this real? Is it hallucinating? Because I'm seeing with all of them, Claude, Gemini, they all make mistakes, and it seems to tend to if you're having a long conversation or there's a lot of data, some things get. I mean, very simple things I've seen get mistaken. They make the mistakes of the dates, it makes mistakes of calculations, but it sounds very, very confident in the delivery. And then you as a user has to check that. And that's where some companies are like, oh, I just replace everybody with AI agents. That's not the case. You need somebody who's an expert at that. You can help them become more efficient, but then when you are relying on your organizations, whether it's somebody who's in charge of security for your app, if they say, "Oh yeah, it's the AI took care of it," but then you get hacked, especially as a healthcare company, you're
Oh
going to
yeah.
have lawyers suing you into oblivion if you have that data privacy breach. So it's so important not to think you can shortcut that side of things, even though like AI it's improving and it seems confident, but you need to have a human being there checking who's experienced at that to make sure you don't make those mistakes.
Yeah, we see this all the time, and I think that one of the things that we talk a lot about and advocate for is having that governance and risk model built from the start. So as
Mhm.
you're developing different AI use cases, what level of oversight, observability, data governance needs to come into that solution so that you can manage it appropriately and not do, 30-day, 60-day,
Mhm.
90-day reviews after the fact to say like how did it go, but have something that's almost real time and giving us that kind of information and observability. Because if the model starts to wander too far off the path and we start making bad decisions or bad recommendations, even when humans are in the loop, things can go. And then all of a sudden, trust, all it takes is we used to have an expression when I was in the army. I won't say it all, but it takes one I'll say, oh shoot moment to ruin a million attaboys, right? So it's like, trust can be lost. It's built up in small pieces over time. It can be lost very quickly with just one incident, right? I think is probably a
Oh,
better way to
yeah. I
phrase
mean,
it. And I think that's a big kind of warning that I think we all know, but it's just always good to remind ourselves of that.
for sure. One of the applications that we designed for the energy industry, it's basically it's kind of like your co-pilot, your assistant, kind of customer service agent, but it's really pulling information from really complex documentation, especially in the energy industry. And so we provide kind of like the sourcing of where it's pulling the information from, not just willy-nilly showing just whatever the answers are, but then you can actually see the evidence, not just a conclusion. And that I think from a clinicians and healthcare, that's also probably important to do as well.
Oh, yeah, having the citations and being able to quickly verify it without having to
Mhm.
click into a document and go to page 110, right? But to be able to have that quick click, be able to verify, as you say, you need the human expertise. This is an ongoing debate that I have here in my house.
Mhm.
My younger daughter is a high school English teacher, and so AI is kind of that looming threat in everything that she does teaching high school students English because they want to use AI to kind of make it easy. And so it's that ability, like how can the tool be used? It's like humans still need to know what questions to ask it, right? You can't just walk up to it and have it do everything for you. They need to know the questions. They need to be able to phrase those and form those well in order to get the output that they need from it. So clearly there's a relationship between the human and the AI solutions, and that's a big piece of it. So
Definitely.
when you think across some of the other work you've done in different industries, what are some other, you've mentioned a couple of examples, but any other lessons that kind of jump out that you think healthcare organizations can relate to and maybe learn from that you see?
So with some of the different industries, like I mean, I see from the energy sector, it's really built for some of the worst conditions. And like an oil and gas field operator, they taught us that pretty interfaces when they fail. When you're stressed, exhausted, you're covered in mud or whatever, I feel like it's got to be the same reality for healthcare. You got to design for the exhausted resident, not really the rested executive. And so I think that's one kind of similarity that I see. Yeah, I mean, it's when it comes to also like robotics as well. I think that's something that has been I that's what I started my career with. I know that a lot of companies they have their engineers build the software interfaces for basically built by engineers for engineers. And that's kind of how I got my whole like UX design uh kind of profession started is from seeing that people on the manufacturing floor they are not engineers, they're regular people working for hours looking at widgets, and when they're building something and then you just ship 1,000 widgets wrong because the software didn't warn you about something or didn't see something that was really important, it becomes very problematic. So by designing something that makes it really easy and knowing that these are the people that have to use it day in and day out, I think it's really important to just go through that. And just from that point forward, I know like the people who design it have to be sitting there with the person who actually uses it because there's so many assumptions that are made. And just even with the oil and gas industry, when we interface with SMEs, these are people that have been doing and have been in the field for basically, and then we'll ask them what do they think. They make assumptions, and then when we get in front of them and we actually user tested it, there's a lot of things that they assumed wrong. So I think even though you may have subject matter expertise in it, again, the industry could change or the situation can change where you're not really having that empathetic view on it. You're just having this bias of, well, this is what I think users are going to do. And it completely changes the game when you're actually in it and seeing it. So these are some of the things that are really important that we see.
Oh, yeah, yeah, and I think, as you're talking to, like, the engineers building for engineers, they have a different
Mhm.
tolerance. I was listening to the Hard Fork podcast last week, and they were interviewing the founder of a robot, like an in-home robot company, and talking about, this is a robot that essentially would be a part of your family
Mhm.
and would clean your house and do those kind of tasks around the house for you. Right now, the technology is so new that there's very little autonomous action by the robot. So when you're requesting things, what's happening right now is they have human operators that are wearing VR headsets back in headquarters, wherever that is,
Yep.
and are assuming control of the robot and doing things like putting away the dishes or folding laundry or those kind of things.
That was the
And a lot
Neo
of this is
robot, wasn't it?
yeah, it is, yeah.
Yeah.
And
I
so they're doing
saw
a
it.
lot of data collection through the robot now and
Mhm.
learning it so that eventually they can automate more and more of this. What I can think about is like part of it, how you're designing for that robot and what it's going to do is because everyone's home is so different
Yeah.
and how it's laid out and how well organized it is. And I think that robot walking through a cluttered room and bumping into the coffee table and then tipping over and breaking a candle, or those are the kind of things. So the healthcare setting, I know there's prediction about robots coming in and doing, various things as well in the patient room or just in the hospital. I mean, we see the robots kind of following the colored lines on the floor to deliver things from a
Mhm.
pharmacy to a department where they need medication restock or something. So clearly, there's a role for all of this stuff. But again, I think the tolerance of an engineer building a home robot and what it's going to do in his home to crash around and kind of figure things out, by the time it reaches general release in the public, the tolerance for that kind of activity is probably very, very low.
Yeah, I mean, I remember in university, my master's thesis was to design a six-legged robot just to walk around the room, and I was using fuzzy logic just because the processor back in those olden days wasn't as powerful as the phone in your hand right now, and so really had to make efficient algorithms just to do basic obstacle avoidance. And so with the it's interesting to see, I'm right now I just purchased a Tesla Model Y recently, and I haven't driven in 2 months, and I love it. It's so cool to see this thing work in action, and it's amazing to see this. But, yeah, when you talk about, like, the Optimus and all these things that are walking around in your house, it becomes really interesting to see how these algorithms will have to, I mean, the dynamics of a road versus in your house is significantly different because at least it's still somewhat two-dimensional versus the robot. Now you're talking 3D space. I mean, that's going to be something to witness when that thing is, actually working and not causing too many problems or bumping into things.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And I think, about the autonomous vehicles too, I'm here in the Boston area where the weather is
Mhm,
pretty cold right now. And
mhm,
a farmer's almanac says we're going to have a pretty messy winter. And so navigating the road is cool when you can see it, but when it
mhm.
starts to be covered with snow and then the snowbanks start building up after multiple storms and it's
Yeah,
half the width that it normally is, right? So very unpredictable environments, which is why I think they really do so much of that work on those products out west.
yeah.
But yeah, lots of good insights I think some reminders, from other industries, but also just basic good product design fundamentals that we've discussed today, Makoto. So I thank you for joining us here on the podcast. It's been great to have you.
Great, thanks for having me, this has been great.
Yeah, great discussion, and always good to lift our heads and kind of look back at product design, look at other industries, see what we can learn, and really try to help advance the mission of healthcare. So, if you liked this episode today, please share it with a colleague. Go ahead, subscribe to future updates. Check us out next time. This has been Mike Moore on the Health Tech Edge.